Death, the great equalizer. Rich or poor, good or evil, death comes for us all. But even so, not all deaths are created equal. Today on DR NOVIS, we are going to be exploring the death of nobility, and possibly one of the most bizarre cases I've ever seen. You see, today we are talking about the King of Soul, the death of Sam Cooke. The King of Soul, Sam Cooke, would come to be known as one of the most influential soul artists of all time, along with being an influential member of the civil rights movement. Though many are familiar with the man, they are familiar less so for his life, and possibly more so for his death, specifically the bizarre and strange circumstances surrounding it. Sam Cooke, born Samuel Cooke in Clarksdale, Mississippi in 1931. 2 years later, his family would move to Chicago. Here, he would discover music, Cooke joining his first music group, the Singing Children, when he was just 6 years old. Cooke would later go on to join several different gospel groups as he got older, eventually making his way to, well, more secular music as the artist would go solo, eventually becoming one of the many faces of the rapidly growing R&B genre through the late 50s and 60s, with Cooke putting out famous singles, Chain Gang, Cupid, and Bring It On Home, as well as critically acclaimed album, Ain't That Good News, along with a host of other works that would lead modern R&B greats to refer to Cooke as the king of R&B, the king of soul music. Life was seemingly going great for Cooke. His music career has taken off. He had started a successful record label. He had a wife and 2 beautiful children. But all of that changed on the night of December 11th, 1964, when Sam Cooke would be shot and killed in a small motel in Los Angeles. December 11, 1964, the Hacienda Motel in South Central LA, located at 91 and South Figueroa Street. When police arrived on scene, they found Cooke dead with a fatal gunshot wound to the chest. Autopsies would later find the bullet had pierced Cooke's heart. Upon questioning, the motel manager, Bertha Franklin, admitted that she had shot Cooke and said that it was in self-defense, though many would come to dispute her account of that night's evenings. You see, the motel owner, Evelyn Carr, was actually the person who called the police, as she was on the phone with said manager, Franklin, when the gunshots happened. Carr apparently hearing the gunshots over the phone, to which she called the police. You see, Cooke, along with another woman, had checked into the hotel earlier that evening. According to Franklin, later that night, Cooke would come banging on her office door, shouting, "Where's the girl?" The man only wearing one shoe and part of his dress coat, completely naked besides that. The woman that Cooke was referring to was the woman that he had arrived at the hotel that night, Elisa Boyer. Franklin tells officers that when she was confronted by Cooke, she told her that no one was in her office, but the man, drunk and angry, came bursting through the door, basically completely naked. According to Franklin, Cooke proceeded to grab her and demanded to know where Boyer was. The two would go into a scuffle, making their way to the floor. Apparently, Franklin had almost 30 pounds on the singer. Eventually, the two would break apart, Franklin getting up, heading over to her desk, where she retrieved a pistol. At this point, she fired 3 times, the last bullet striking Cooke in the heart. According to Franklin, Cooke, after being shot in the office, stood there confused, looking at the woman, saying, "Lady, you shot me," as according to Franklin, he began to charge her, at which point she dropped her pistol, picked up a broomstick, in which she smacked him over the head, apparently the man going unconscious, to which he would die. Later, the autopsy would reveal a 2-inch bump on the man's head, which seemed to corroborate the strike to the head from a broom. As well, they determined that Cooke's blood alcohol level was somewhere around 0.11, the man apparently being extremely drunk. Franklin herself had suffered no injuries from the scuffle, leading many to wonder if her testimony was exactly true. Boyer, the young woman who was at the heart of this entire situation, told police that she had met the singer earlier that night at a nightclub. According to her, she had asked him to drive her home, but the man, being too drunk, refused and started driving to a motel, at which point she took Boyer up to a room, and the man, apparently, according to her, attempted to assault her, at which point she managed to escape, taking some of Cooke's clothes with her as she ran out of the motel. Since this case happened in the mid-60s, many would come to question Boyer's testimony along with Franklin, as witnesses at the nightclub alleged that Boyer willingly went with Cooke in the car ride. As well, people seem to speculate that Boyer actually might have been the person taking advantage of Cooke, as some suggest she might have been trying to rob him, as patrons of this nightclub reportedly said they saw Cooke there with thousands of dollars potentially in cash. Police never finding any of this apparent cash on Cooke, as Cooke's wallet would be found, but it would be completely empty, the only money on Cooke being a small clip of money that was found in his jacket pocket, somewhere around $100. Ultimately, both Boyer and Franklin, the woman who shot Cooke, would pass polygraph tests, their testimony being allowed into the court proceedings, at which point Franklin would be found innocent, and it would be decided that her case was in self-defense. She killed the man in self-defense. However, this information didn't sit right with a lot of people at the time, and for years to come, many speculated on the events that took place with Cooke on that night. Many refusing to believe that Cooke would have cheated on his wife and found himself in a situation like this in a shady motel. Some other inconsistencies would arise that would cause people to question events around Cooke's death. Apparently, according to the autopsy, Cooke was shot with a .22 pistol, yet the gun that was registered to Franklin was actually a .32 caliber pistol, and apparently the bullet in question, the bullet that would pierce Cooke's heart, would later go missing sometime after evidence was collected. Fellow guests of the hotel as well were questioned that night, the night that all of these events took place, and apparently none of them report hearing a scuffle, let alone a gunshot. Many believes that Cooke's death was possibly a setup, but the question was, who would set Cooke up? Some believe that it was his manager, Alan Klein, though no evidence has been found. You see, after Cooke's death, the rights to all of his music and his music label ultimately would pass to his manager, Klein, the man making a, well, pretty penny off the death of his friend and star musical singer, but there's no other evidence besides this motive that supports this theory. Others claim that Cooke's death was potentially orchestrated by the government and the FBI. As you see, the man was a prominent member and a vocal member in the civil rights movement, really good friends with Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, two other prominent black men in America that were part of the civil rights movement. You see, many believe that Cooke was possibly under surveillance by the FBI, as like we said, he was friends with Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, a man that we know was being followed and watched by the FBI. After his death, Muhammad Ali would go on record saying if Cooke had been Frank Sinatra, the Beatles, or Ricky Nelson, the FBI would have most certainly been investigating his death. But once again, there's no actual evidence that Cooke was being invested by the FBI, let alone murdered by the government, but something can definitely be taken away from Ali's words. The level and the intensity of the investigation into Cooke's death, well, really, the lack thereof. You see, in large part, Cooke's death became a mystery due to the, well, incompetence of the LAPD, the cursory investigation, giving many the impression that his death was being swept under the rug, or that no one cared about the death of a black man in California. Norman Edelin, one of the few men of color working within the LAPD at the time, says that Cooke's investigation was emblematic of the racism that permeated every level of the force at this time, something that was really just par for the course. The most convincing theory outside of the official story given by the two women is that Cooke had potentially been set up and robbed that night. You see, later, some years after Cooke's death, it would be revealed that Boyer and Franklin had both received prior charges of prostitution, and many wondered what if these two women were actually trying to rob Cooke? What if this was a setup, a trick from the very beginning? As we stated earlier, reports from the nightclub had stated that Cooke was carrying a large amount of cash on him, some saying upwards of thousands of dollars in cash, but when police searched his body, they discovered that his wallet was empty, his credit cards missing, no cash on him, except for the money that was found in his suit jacket pocket. The theory then is that Cooke was set up by Boyer and Franklin. Boyer got Cooke extremely drunk at the nightclub and then enticed him to go to a motel. What makes it strange and potentially convincing is that Cooke apparently drove 15 miles from said nightclub to the Hacienda Motel, passing numerous other motels, many that were way less seedy and nicer than the eventual motel where they ended up at, and we know that money wasn't an option for Cooke, so why did he drive 15 miles with a blood alcohol level of 0.11? only to go to this very specific motel. The theory goes that once they arrived in their room in the Hacienda Motel, Boyer managed to distract Cooke and then fled from the room, taking his clothes along with his wallet and money with him, presumably this large amount of cash. Cooke, realizing he had been duped, in a drunken stupor chases after her, realizing that potentially the manager, the woman behind the desk at the motel, Franklin, was involved. He goes to the office door and demands to see the woman. In his drunken stupor, he begins to bust down the door, and then we get the interaction with Franklin, which ultimately would lead to his death. The theory then is that both Franklin and Boyer were originally working together to set Cooke up and eventually taking his money, but basically things went wrong and ultimately Cooke would end up shot. As far as where I personally stand on this legendary singer's death, the events just all seem way too odd, and it definitely feels like there's much more to this story that the police failed to follow through on. The inconsistencies with the caliber of the gun definitely raise a lot of questions for me, along with the missing bullet, as well the fact that Franklin, the woman who scuffled with Cooke, received no injuries or any kind of evidence of a scuffle. Also, why would a woman like her, after shooting a man in the heart, proceed to drop her gun and then hit him in the head with a broom? If the man was really charging her and she really did fear for her life, why would she simply not shoot him again? There really is just way too many questions that don't seem to make sense regarding this situation, but unfortunately the lack of, well, really seemingly caring from the police department, most likely due to their racial biases, will ultimately mean that we'll never know what happened that night in December, which most likely racial discrimination and racial biases were at play here, especially in regards to how deep and thorough this investigation into his death actually was, which really does make sense when you consider the state of the times and the racial climate of said era. So what really happened to legendary artist and singer Sam Cooke? While no, the FBI most likely didn't kill him and most likely wasn't even following the man, even though it is possible, the strangeness of his death and the circumstances that surround it, along with the horrible job done by the LAPD, will continue to leave people wondering and speculating, as Sam Cooke's death is still considered by many to be the most weird and bizarre of any in Hollywood to date. As always, guys, if you enjoyed the video, learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think happened to the legendary singer, the king of R&B, the king of soul music, Sam Cooke? Was the man set up? Was he murdered? Was something deeper and darker at play here? Or possibly, maybe, as though it pains me to say it, the official story might be true, and possibly this was all just a big misunderstanding, a big accident fueled by drugs and alcohol. But we really just will never know. As always, my friends, I hope to see you in the next video. Stay safe out there. It's a spooky world.